Thank you everyone for Zooming in today or Teamsing in. Appreciate the time and everyone's commitment to the conversation tonight. And so, really, the goal of the conversation is to talk about the five pillars of ethos. So, identity, purpose, values, vision, and goals. And tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what legacy means on a personal level. We're going to reflect on some of the daily decisions and how we make those decisions and recommit to those decisions every day with a long-term purpose in mind. And then just hope to gain some insight from all of you high level individuals who live with integrity and vision. But just a little bit about Ethos. Ethos is a nonprofit based in Frisco, Texas, and it talks about Ethos Village. And so that comes from the old African saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And so it's a virtual platform that allows us to come together as a community to really strategize how we can better pour into our children and our respective families. And so we use the generational wisdom from the village to help members of the village redefine their mental paradigm around identity, purpose, vision, and values. And so the platform was created by the nonprofit Ethos Education Group, founded in 2012 by Tim Brown, Everson Walls, and Michael Davis. And so the goal of is to have monthly webinars to discuss issues we feel are important to our communities and our families. And so the hope is that we can motivate each other and others to be a part of the village and continue to have important conversations. And the reminder is that it takes all of us it takes a village to raise a child. So I'd just like to go around and kind of have everyone, introduce themselves a little bit, and, I'll go last and introduce myself. But Kelsey, why don't you start us out and just give an introduction?
Sure, thank you. So hi, I'm Kelsey O'Connor. I am a former Division I softball player for NC State and currently a motivational speaker and mental performance coach. Just kind of a short summary about me is that I grew up as an athlete, a student athlete, and poured a lot into school and athletics, and then ultimately had an injury that shifted my purpose and my goals. Ultimately delivered a speech, and it ended up going viral on the internet and gave me a new purpose, which is just impacting people through sharing my story of kind of refining my identity outside of injury, outside of sports, and some of these other things, and just the impact that we can make with each other when we're seeing for people for beyond their labels. So that is a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Thank you for that. Angie, why don't you give an introduction?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. My name is Angie Swint. I'm super excited to be here with y'all tonight. I have been with the Rangers, the Texas Rangers Baseball Club, for 25 plus years, started as an intern. And now I'm involved in Rangers Sports Network, which is our regional sports network. I'm not originally from Texas. I'm originally from Kansas. So I feel like a transplant, although I've been here quite a long time, and just appreciate joining y'all tonight.
Thank you. On to Jim for an introduction.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Cochran. I'm the Chief Business Officer for the Texas Rangers. This is my 29th season with the club. Like Angie, I started as an intern back in 1997. I realized at a pretty young age, probably in junior high and early high school, that I was not good enough to play Major League Baseball. So I endeavored to do the next best thing, which was to work in Major League Baseball. And so I've been with the club for quite a while. I did grow up here. I went to LD Bell High School in the mid-cities, and it's an honor to have Everson Walls on here. I used to watch him play over at Texas Stadium back in the day when I was a kid. And so pretty neat to be here, and thank you for having me.
All right. Everson, want to give a quick intro for those that don't know?
All right, I'll try to get it in before my dog starts barking again at the trash man. My name is Everson Walls, co-founder of Ethos Education Group. Myself, Michael Davis, and Tim Brown. Just happy to hear how people like Kelsey have the courage to step out on faith and do some things. And now you end up where you are right now. I think she pretty much depicts what it's all about to be part of Ethos Education Group. We are people that the reason we started this was so that we could step out, help other people step out on faith and understand that they've got support. So, yeah, that's what Ethos is all about. That's what Mike Davis and Everson Wall is all about. Thanks.
Coach Davis, intro.
Yeah, I'll just add, one of the things that I was able to do by going to UC Berkeley, Damian Simeon, one of my good friends, teammates, is actually the father of Marcus Simeon. So that's like my nephew. We kind of grew up, back in the day and taking care of each other as a village. And I think when you go back and look at the ethos and the genesis of just people in general just doing great things, it's all based on a village of support. And I think that's where this whole thing has come from with Walls and Tim and Joseph and obviously with Marcus and his dad. Just seeing all the support all around us allows us to actually do great things and be successful. So that's really what this whole thing is about, is us coming together as a village, as a community, and pouring back into one another.
Great. So a little bit about me. Joseph Nash. I grew up in Dallas, Texas there. And I was introduced to Coach Davis and Ethos when I was a junior in high school. So I was actually playing six-man football at the time, and I was presented with the opportunity to attend Trinity Christian Academy. And Mike Singletary, the Hall of Fame linebacker, was a coach at the time, and obviously Coach Davis was there as well. And I knew I was going to get challenged academically and athletically, making the transition there. But really, the biggest challenge I faced was socially. So I walk in, and I'm the one of two black kids in my class, and it's a K through 12 school. So a lot of those friendships had been, set. So I came in and I was kind of seen as an outsider in a lot of ways, and dealt with a lot of things that, shaped me into who I am today, but ultimately was really inspired by Coach Davis and Ethos. And once I began to really understand my identity and purpose, my values and vision and goals, I knew that the environment I would be in would change, the people I would be around would change. But if I understood myself and my values, it wouldn't have an impact. And a story that I always tell from my time at TCA is we were in a history English class, and we had done an in-class essay, and the teacher handed it back and told the class I'd received one of the highest grade in the class and asked me to read a portion of it. And so the student next to me leaned over and said, "Wow, you must have got an extra 10 points for being black." And I knew in that moment he looked at me and only saw me in one way, only saw me as a football player, a dumb jock. And that's what really was a turning point for me. So I began to focus more on academics, focus more on seeing myself outside of just being a football player. My senior year, I began getting recruited by Yale University to play football. And so they ended up offering me a spot on the football team. But due to COVID, they were allowing all their seniors to come back. So I actually went to boarding school up north in Connecticut for a year. So I went to boarding school at Taft, spent a year there, and now I'm a rising senior at Yale playing football there still. But I have a wide range of interests. I'm actually a sociology major focusing on impression management and kind of the identity side and how individuals act within certain structures, but also very interested in, finance. So working in investment banking internship now at Morgan Stanley. So I'm zooming in from Midtown Manhattan and just in the middle of Times Square right now, working on the corporate derivatives team. So just a wide range of interest. But I think that's what kind of gets into the conversation tonight, is really just transitioning through these different areas and learning to see yourself as more than anything that anyone could say, and just saying, okay, I'm not going to allow any individual or any structure or any situation put me in a box and define me. And that's really the legacy that, I think about and I consider. And another thing that I consider is about how we view our own value, how we view our self-value, and kind of what causes our definition or our value to change and throughout time. And so we have, student athletes that had to transition away from sports, and people that have worked their way up in the business world with the Texas Rangers, a world-class organization. And so I think we've got the right people on tonight. And so hopefully we can have a good conversation. But I think, Kelsey, since you started by saying, how you transitioned from being a student athlete and being injured talk a little bit about how that injury really forced you to think of yourself as more than a student athlete and think of the other possibilities and opportunities that were out there that you maybe didn't consider before.
Yeah, so that injury, especially, it was a head injury. And so it really kind of forced me to grapple with that identity pretty abruptly. I think even just defining myself outside of athletics was something that I always tried to do or said that I was doing, knowing that it wasn't going to be a long-term thing for me as a softball player, but still feeling defined by it because that's where I spent all my time. That's what I'd been going towards since I was young. Being a student athlete was my dream. And similarly to like pursuing academics, I was just so wrapped up in achievement. And so when I had this injury, it was a head injury, and I immediately went from doing so well in school to really struggling and almost failing out of classes. Immediately had to medically retire after about 6 weeks. And so all of these things that I thought didn't define me, I needed something to redirect to, and realizing that what was in my control in that moment when so much was spiraling out of control. And now I not only am not playing softball anymore, but I also don't know if I'm going to finish school, or I don't know. I really wanted to be a social worker, but I was struggling cognitively and not even sure that that was a path for me. And so really pivoting to what is it that does define me if it's not academics or softball or these other things, even if it is that I'm a good person. And so I kind of redirected and decided to focus on my attitude and how I was treating others, and then also just what makes me unique and some of those characteristics that I'd developed through some of the things that I was in, like that strength and resilience and empathy that couldn't be taken away from me, even though the tangible success of softball and all of these other things was. And so as I was doing that, it really was just kind of natural to start describing other people beyond their external labels so that I could see myself in a different way as well. And so starting with just how I was genuinely practicing describing myself and other people. And then over time, I just saw that change the way that I saw the world, change the way that I saw myself. And it opened up just these other possibilities because I was grounded in these things that were dependent on how I woke up and decided to have a good attitude or treat others well and tap into like my unique gifts and feeling founded in that. And so ultimately this opportunity came during my senior year. I'd recovered from the injury pretty well. I had felt this village of support, and I applied to give a graduation speech. And in doing that, it ended up opening public speaking opportunities and almost launching me in this completely different direction of public speaking and getting to share a message that was bigger than sports and bigger than academics, because everybody has something that defines them. And so that ultimately just completely shifted what I was able to do and connect with people beyond anything I'd ever expected. And also shifted me into like athlete mental health and performance. And so getting to kind of pursue those things, I had opened my mind to it, I think, because I was focusing on who people were, even just around me and in my circle, beyond what they were doing. And so just that genuine self-reflection opened up those doors, if that answers your question.
It does. Great way to answer the question. You know, I also think about working in the business world too, like Jim and Angie are. Obviously, there's sports attached to it, so there's that can, you know, make it more enjoyable. When you talk about a 20+ career in a world-class organization, coming in as an intern, I'm thinking about me being at Morgan Stanley 30 years, but I think it's crazy to think about. But when you're working in a really fast-paced and a really demanding area, it's hard because like Kelsey was saying, I never wanted, it was hard for me to separate the value that, even now, the value that I bring to the Yale football team versus the value that I see myself having outside too. And one thing this internship has taught me is it's very similar in a demanding space like investment banking is, where the value that you bring at Morgan Stanley, the value that you bring at Texas Rangers is so connected to your identity, or it can be. And so, Jim, I'd like you to speak about how you've learned to separate kind of the value you bring the Texas Rangers organization versus your self-value and your self-identity outside.
Yeah, it's a great question. Kelsey kind of mentioned it a little bit as well, but what we talk about a lot at our place is attitude and effort. And we're at the office so much. Baseball is a hard sport to work in. We play more games than all the other sports, and we're there a lot. And Angie knows we just finished a 9-game homestand, so 9 games in 10 days. We're there until the game's over in a lot of cases. 10 o'clock, you don't get home till late. You're back at the office early in the morning, and you don't want to be around a bunch of people who aren't fun to be around or nice to be around. So attitude and effort is part of what we talk about, but that plays into your question, Joe. And that is, what do you want to be known as outside of the office? And I wanted to be known as someone that cares for others, treats others well, and had a good attitude when I showed up every day, because we're in the entertainment business. That's what we're doing. We get to watch world-class baseball players play every day, but on the part of the business that Angie and I control, her on the broadcast and making sure that the fans that are watching at home have a great experience, me with everything that we're doing inside the ballpark too, because we can't control whether or not we win or lose the game. And so part of what we do there too is having an experience, but at the end of the day, separating ourselves from, Jim, the person that works for the Rangers. And that is how a lot of people know me. They're like, oh yeah, he's the Rangers guy. He's the Rangers guy. But I want everybody that works there at the Rangers also to view me as somebody who cared about them personally. And we talk about how do we try to help them within their career or even in their personal life. That's part of what we try to do. And just, good attitude and good effort. And then as you move up in your career into leadership positions as well, it's being a good leader and mentor, because in a lot of cases, if we ask the right questions, say we're having a one-on-one with an employee and we ask the right questions, a lot of times you can find out that their work performance could be suffering or maybe going great because of something else that's happening in their life. And everybody's got something going on in their life. That's what I've come to find. And if they don't, they will be shortly, or they just finished dealing with something. And so a lot of times they just want to talk about some of those things. So even being a mentor is not just from a business perspective. And certainly we don't pry and try to get into people's personal life. But if they do want to talk about things like that, being somebody that's there that can help them as they're working through, we got a lot of young people that are having kids, and how do you deal with not being able to sleep every night because you're up with your kid, and, trying to be productive at work still, because you talked about it. It is, especially on our sales side, it's fast paced, and we've got lofty goals. Angie knows, but our goal is to be an elite MLB franchise. And we talk about that all the time, but you do have to separate your personal life from that. And because we're at the office so much, we do have to be intentional with our home life as well. And when are we making time for our family and our kids and things along those lines? So that's what we try to do. That's how I try to handle it at the Rangers.
How about early on in your career when maybe you were kind of head down and maybe you were doing things behind the scenes to progress in your career, but you felt like that they were going unnoticed? And we have a mental performance coach, and we talk about what it means to win with no applause, to still put your head down, still strive for something when you can't necessarily see the outcome. You might not get the recognition, you might not get the credit for it, but you're still expected to show up and recommit to it every day. What did it mean for you in those moments, and how do you consider that maybe making a sacrifice in the short term, sacrificing the gratification short term, knowing that it's going to pay off in the long term?
Yeah, it's almost like you studied my career and knew some things that had gone on. So in 2006, my boss said he's leaving the company, and so I applied for his position to run our sponsorship group with the Rangers, and I was told flat out immediately, you will not be considered for this position. And I was kind of bummed about it. And then when they went through the process and ultimately when they hired the candidate that was to be my new boss, I became very frustrated, because this is a person who didn't have the experience I did, and was just didn't have the chops that I felt like I had. And so I had to make a decision. I was at a career crossroads. And so what do you do in that instance? And I've always been somebody that says, if you show up, you do great work, eventually you'll get recognized. And that was challenged at that moment, because I thought I'd been doing really good work. Not the people that were making the decisions didn't agree. And I became really frustrated, and I had to decide, do I want to bounce and go get a job somewhere else to advance my career? Or do I want to stay here with the team that I grew up rooting for and in the area that I grew up living in, and just see what comes my way, put my head back down and go back to work. And ultimately, I decided that. And in fairness, part of that was because of two young daughters. My family's here. My in-laws only live 3 hours away. And I didn't want to move to another part of the country at that stage in my life. And so ultimately, I decided to stay. And eventually, I did get promoted several years later. And what I realized was that I actually wasn't ready for that job at the time like I thought I was. And, in hindsight, I realize it now. And of course, we're all eager to move up the food chain as fast as we can. But I realize that I would have probably not had great success at that job at that time had I been promoted. And then, 3, 4, 5 years later, when I was actually promoted, I was in a better position to have success in that new leadership role where I hadn't before. And so I've always been somebody that I'm not a self-promoter a whole lot. You do have to have a certain level of ego to eventually start moving up the food chain and sell yourself to, the higher ups and eventually the owners of our franchise. But I like to let my work speak for itself and kind of operate that way.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And you briefly touched on success, and we'll come back to that. But Angie, when you're in a entertainment type role where kind of I would assume your role is centered around engagement, getting people to engage, getting people to come to the games, getting people to tune in, right? So in your role, what does success look like in your role right now to you at this point?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's changed a lot over the past couple years, right? Because previously we were operating in conjunction with our television rights holder. And so we had some involvement, we had some engagement, but we weren't making the ultimate decisions. And within the past year, it was determined that we were going to start our own network. We were going to build it from ground up, and we were going to effort to deliver a really quality broadcast. And it was very important to us to build something that was entertaining, that people wanted to tune into. As Jim said, baseball is no joke. It is 162 games for the regular season alone. So, it's obviously very difficult for players, but certainly difficult for fans. When you want to participate and you want to dial in, 162 games is a lot. You add spring training into that, and then certainly postseason runs are a fun addition as well. It can make it a long season. And so our goal when we sat down together and Jim and I really started talking about what this was going to look like, we wanted to make it fun and engaging and entertaining. And part of that was making some tough decisions, right, on who was going to be involved, who some of our mouthpieces were going to be, the way we were going to be building the shows. We wanted to take, almost a 180 from the way that maybe it had been done or has always been done in television, because we didn't feel like it was working. Our audience was deteriorating. And we thought if we make it where we're having a good time, and the people who are producing the shows every night are having a good time, and our talent is having a good time, perhaps our fans will have a good time watching it too. And so, I think the thing that I've seen the most value from in that is that we have just seen a great audience reaction to what we're doing. And part of it took a great deal of buy-in from our entire organization, our ownership group, our baseball ops team, because it was going to be a departure from the way it had always been done. And so we needed everybody to be okay with it. We knew we were going to swing and miss on a few things that we would try, and we hoped that we would be successful more often than not. And I feel like given the response that we've received thus far, we feel like we're in a pretty good spot there. And so that to me has been really exciting to see what we could build. And we do, we just like anything else, when you're trying to come up with a new way to do things, you take ideas from shows that you like and build around that. And so, we've tried to just make it incredibly fun and engaging for anybody tuning in. But, we've hired Elvis Andrus to come in and he works on our pre and post game show along with Jared Sandler. And we've built challenges that are, challenge our broadcasters, challenge our fans, and just hope to help drive that engagement and tune in. That's probably the biggest goal that we've had in this process.
Yeah. And I assume when you were starting out and had to make the decision on the direction to go, there was like, you didn't have a crystal ball. You didn't have, a fairy that could appear and tell you what the outcome was going to be of, all this hard work that you were going to put in. So you're almost kind of had that goal in mind, but you weren't exactly 100% sure of what the outcome would be. What advice would you have for not only student athletes, but just the younger generation and just all people really, that to set their minds on a goal and go after something when they're really not sure what the outcome is going to be?
That is such a good question and very astute of you. We definitely didn't know where this was going to wind up, right? And when we started evaluating all of the options, we just kept saying we were gathering as much information as we could so we could give it to our ownership to make the best decision possible. And they could have gone a bunch of different directions. It didn't necessarily have to go the way that it has. I am now very thankful that it did, because it's given us some control and some oversight on the deliverables, and helped us reach our fan base in a way that we probably wouldn't have previously. But at the time, and Jim can definitely attest to this, it was tough. We were getting into stuff that we weren't 100% sure we had everything lined out. Television networks as a general rule are fairly long and well established. And the people that have been involved in that have been doing it a long time. And Jim and I work for a baseball team. There's just no other way to say it. So we were sort of masquerading as television employees trying to figure out the best way to build a network. And I think my advice in that process would be, and it sort of goes back to what Jim said and our overall, values that we project at the Rangers, but it's just, if you go in with a positive attitude and you try to do the very best you can every single day and make the best decisions with the information that you have available, hopefully you get down the right path. And I think that's something that we've been able to see, and it's something I'm really proud of. But you have to commit. Being partially in isn't going to work in those situations.
No, it makes sense. You have to go all in or not at all. Kelsey, back to your transition away. It sounds like your mental performance side, your motivational speaking side really wasn't something that was necessarily planned. You give a graduation speech, it goes viral, and now the whole, a large population begins to see you in a certain way. And I'd like to hear a little bit about that kind of transition for you. And maybe you at times were feeling like, is this going to be something that's really for me? Is it going to be sustainable? Is it something that's going to fulfill me? When did you know that it was that the mental performance side and everything you do now was going to be fulfilling to you?
That's a really good question. Also, Jim and Angie, I really appreciate your answers as well. Super insightful. I knew that the mental performance, so I went into school wanting to do social work, and then I knew I wanted to do athlete mental health kind of towards the tail end, even right before I ended up getting injured. And then when I gave this speech, it kind of just like threw the whole puzzle piece out of the question and like gave me this opportunity to decide like which direction am I going to go. I did not expect for the speech to blow up the way that it did. And so I started getting these invitations to universities and schools and conferences to speak all around the country. And I had never spoken publicly prior to that speech and never expected to do it, and just was learning as I was going. I didn't expect it to be fulfilling either. I was so nervous and had no idea what I was doing. And then the more I was doing it, I just realized that even sharing my own story was a way for others to share theirs. And like, that was my favorite part of it, was connecting with people afterwards and the doors that opened. And so right after the speech, I was taking a gap year anyways to figure out what I wanted to do. And for a second, when it first went viral, I kind of had this urgency and this rush. When one thing goes viral, you almost feel like now you owe more online, or maybe that's the route you're supposed to go. And there's almost this temptation, like for me, even to say, does this mean I should be heavier on social media? Like, is that the route to go? And it was a good reflection moment, because I think it can be so drawing, the virality or social media or influencing, but that just wasn't something that I was ever really interested in. And wasn't my purpose going into writing and speaking. And so I was able to kind of reflect on, maybe that doesn't mean that social media is the route. Maybe it just means that I'm on the right path in feeling like when I create something that's very authentic, that is the path I should go. And I love speaking in person. And so the more I started doing that, the more I wanted to do something also long-term and sustainable with athletes and in that mental health and transition space as they were transitioning out of sport. And then when I went back to school, I realized I wanted to do performance, because I wanted to help athletes while they were in sport and really realize just those qualities that they were developing there, and that mental performance aspect to help just people perform at their best, both on and off the field. And it was just this really interesting transition from speaking to mental health to mental performance. And then realizing I could do the mental performance and the speaking kind of alongside one another, and not necessarily have to choose one, but kind of allow it to go wherever it's going to go. But realizing that I love working with people in person, and that's something that fulfills me and is purposeful. So if mental performance and speaking is the way I can do that, then that's the route I'm going to go, because I'm passionate about athletics, and I'm passionate about spreading a message of people, seeing themselves for more than their labels. So it just kind of goes back to that why. And so that's what drives my work in speaking and performance, but really unexpected to get into both of them.
How do you measure the impact that you're able to have, or like the success? Like when you go and speak to these athletes, when you go to these universities and colleges, how do you know that they're really like grasping what you say? Like, how do you walk away feeling like, oh, I actually did really make an impact?
I love that question. Honestly, it is the questions afterwards and then the messages I receive. Because when you're up there for 60 minutes and everyone's just quiet, you just don't know what's happening, if they're loving it, if they're hating it. And so afterwards, the events that I've gone to, whether it was I had the opportunity to speak to Oklahoma, some of their student athletes, their softball players, football players, that was really special. And I was speaking to them and not really sure how it was landing. And then they ended up staying for 45 minutes asking questions, and really deep questions about things that they were going through or nerves that they had. And so I feel like that's just a reflection to me that if I was able to get them to think about seeing themselves differently, or if I was just able to spark something that they can walk away with, that relates to them, and not them being impressed with me, but them being able to think about something differently, and then that's successful to me. So it's really when they start asking questions afterwards and they stay voluntarily, or I've been really blessed afterwards. I'll get emails from people that will find my email or find my Instagram, and they'll send me a long message about how it touched them, or it gave them hope, or they saw themselves in it. And so that is truly the most rewarding thing to receive, is just some of those messages and that verbal feedback directly from them. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Of course, yeah, that's why we're here. No, that's a great answer. I love it. And then now one of the things that we're always thinking about with Ethos is legacy, and kind of the message and all the people you have a positive impact on and touch, and how you're remembered in a way. Jim, when you're in the front office, are you thinking about the legacy that you're going to leave?
Yeah, it's funny because I did see this as one of the questions in advance of this, and Angie and I were kind of laughing when we were meeting, because I said I had never thought about it. I just, like I said, show up, do good work, and what I have thought about is when we talk about becoming an elite MLB franchise, playing a small role as part of that, and taking some measure of pride in being one of the ones that helped us get to there. I have thought about that before, but it's interesting because Ray Casas, who works in our foundation, and I think you guys worked through to get Angie and I on here, he introduced me. So we have a fellowship program every year called the Charlie Pride Fellows. It's during the summertime. We bring in 8 to 10 kids that come in and work in different departments to get exposure to what working in baseball is like. And he set up a meeting for me with them. And when he was introducing me, and he said, Jim runs the business of the Rangers, and he's a well-respected, and he went on for a little bit, talking a little bit about me. That's probably the first time that I ever thought about well, gosh, what kind of impact or what do other people think about me, specifically my coworkers? What do they think about me and what we're doing here? And so it wasn't as much legacy focused, but when he said that, I thought to myself, well, I'm glad he thinks that people respect me and that I work hard because that's what I strive for. And so that's probably as close to thinking about legacy as I've ever really come. I just enjoy showing up every day, going to work. Somebody asked me what the favorite part of the job is. I said 7:05 every night because that's when we're putting on our show. That's when you get to watch the best baseball players in the world do their thing, but that's when we get to show everybody all the hard work that we've been doing, whether it's on the broadcast or in the stadium. And so that's what I love showing. And quite honestly, that's for 29 years. That's really what I've been focused on. And I had never really thought about what kind of legacy that I'm leaving. I do take some pride in, we have some employees that work for us, and one of the things we talk about as leaders in our company is part of our job is to help them get to where they're trying to go. And sometimes we realize that that's not always going to be with the Rangers, and we're going to lose some really good people, some rock stars that work for us because they may move out of the sports industry, or most likely they're probably moving on to another team as they advance their career. But I do love seeing the growth of our employees, especially the ones that have stayed around and that we see. And I can think specifically of two that work in our partnership department. They came from broken families, basically, and there wasn't a lot of college in their family's history. Both of them went to college, got on with the Rangers, and have become, great employees for us. They've done very well for themselves as far as financially and also building their families. And it's fun to see people like that in the organization grow and do what they do. And so I don't know if that really plays into my legacy or not, but because like I said, I hadn't thought a lot about it, but certainly an interesting question.
Thanks. I appreciate that response. Angie, would you say that you'd have a similar response? You hadn't really thought about legacy, or?
Admittedly, I had not. I mean, Jim's right. In our conversation today, I think we both thought, oh, we may have to consider this quickly. But I think when I think about it now, for me, it's just, we have such a great team that has built that has built Ranger Sports Network. The amount of hours that they've had to put in, the way that they show up and do it every day is so impressive to me. And we're so grateful to them for the work that they've put in and the way they've built this, because so much of what Rangers fans see every night is based on their effort and work. And so if I think about, what that would be for me, it's just, I want them to feel how much we all appreciate the work that they've put in, because they are there. As Jim said, it's early in the morning, maybe not as early as Jim arrives, but 9 a.m. or so for us. And we don't leave until, maybe an hour or so after the post-game show's over. So we're getting home around midnight, and they show up and do it 9 days in a row. It is tough. And I'm eternally grateful for the way they show up to do it, the attitude that they show up with, and the work ethic that they put into it, and the pride they take in this is just so awesome. And so I think for me, if I could evaluate, any kind of legacy, it would just be in getting to see what they've done.
Right. No, that's a great point. I think oftentimes in some cases it's better not to think about the legacy or the outcome, but just think about showing up every day, doing the best you can, being the kind of person that people want to be around. And then if you do all those things, then your legacy kind of writes itself in a lot of ways. I also think about motivation and things that like kind of keep you going. And maybe early on in your career, it's like the people you're around. And then later on, when you're a father or mother or husband or wife, that can kind of move in and kind of become some of your motivation too. But I also think a big motivator for me is seeing people that have been in my position and that have done well, and having mentors that, that I can relate to, and that can, say, keep me on the right track when I start to waver. How important is it, the mentorship side? And Kelsey, maybe it'd be helpful for you to go first on this, but like, who's really helped you stay grounded in who you are, when kind of the world and everything in it tries to like push you away, really test you? Who's kept you on track?
Yeah, I love this question because I would say my family, especially my mom, when I just felt, whether it was kind of as I was spiraling, like mid-injury, having no idea, or when I experienced this rapid success and all of a sudden everyone's view of me, I was reading online and all of these different things. Like my mom and my family were there. They were always that support. And she especially was just somebody that I've just been able, we just talk all the time. And so she was able to just even reflect back to me my own values and who I am and how she sees me, because we were so close. And so she just always kept me grounded, even just not always in just reflecting back to me things that I had said and how she saw me, but even just asking me questions to get me to reflect out loud and what is my long-term goal. So even though life feels so rapid and I feel tugged in all these different directions and this crazy stuff is happening on the internet, what do you, she would even ask, like, what do you want your legacy to be? Or what is fulfilling to you? And so having somebody that knows you well and that you can trust, it's such a blessing. And my mom has been that for me since just forever. And so having that village, I definitely have that in my family, and they've been there for me to kind of keep me grounded in who I am and keep me humble as well.
Yes, I definitely agree. Staying humble is so important, and keeping yourself on track. Jim, you've been in the business for over 30 years. You've seen a lot of people come and go. I'm sure you've had a ton of mentors who poured into you and kind of helped you see yourself as more. Speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, so early in your career, you do need to find those mentors. When I was an intern, I just wanted to work for the Rangers full time. Then when I was working full time, I just wanted to make a little more money. Then when you get into it, you think, okay, well, if I'm going to advance my career, you need some people that kind of show you the ropes and help you along the way. And so Angie knows some of these people, but in the year 2000, the Rangers and the Dallas Stars Hockey Club merged because the Stars owner had bought the Rangers, and we merged with all these people from the Stars, and it was kind of this weird time. But that's actually when I learned how to sell sponsorships. Was a gentleman named Bill Strong, who was an interesting older gentleman that had been selling hockey for a long time, but he really showed us this is how we do things, go out this way. And I learned a lot from that. And then through that process too, Brad Alberts, who's now the CEO and president of the Dallas Stars, I worked for him for 10 years, learned a lot from him. And there's been other folks along the way, but like you asked Kelsey about staying grounded, my wife does a pretty good job of that even today, of reminding me, where I started from, and don't get too excited about everything that's going on and whatnot. So she does pretty well in that regard. I've got two daughters, 24 and 20, and they help keep me grounded too. And you had asked about motivation a little bit too, and like I said early on, I just wanted a full-time job, and then I just wanted to prove myself. And then when I got married and you have two kids all of a sudden, and my wife stopped working, the motivation's a lot different, because if you're the sole provider, then you're showing up, kind of with a different grind every day. And so that went on for a while too. And all of that kind of rolled up with the fact that I just, I wanted to make my family, my parents, my brother, and my family, wife and kids proud of what I was doing. But at the end of the day, I wanted to be part of something that we were building with the Rangers. And ultimately, when we got to the point where we built our new ballpark, and that process started in 2016, and being part of that is just, it's exciting to show up to work every day when you get to build a brand new stadium out of the ground. And Angie and I had a big part as part of the probably group of 15 in the front office that sat with the architects, monthly and then weekly, to determine what was this place going to look like, what amenities were we going to have. And so when you have things like that, that's the motivation that kind of keeps you going and keeps you moving, through the process. And then it doesn't hurt if your team's really good and you get to go play and win a World Series, and get to do fun things like design, championship rings and things like that. So that keeps us going too.
Angie, what advice do you have for those seeking a mentor? How do you build that relationship? Because oftentimes it's actually up to the mentee to really build that relationship and to be persistent and to reach out and.
Yeah, there's no question. First of all, I want to just say you ask fantastic questions. I think you definitely could be a reporter in your future. I don't know, Jim smiling, he may have had the same thoughts, but you really do a great job with this. Um, I think when somebody's looking to build a relationship with and develop a mentor in their lives, I think, at least in my experience, it's always happened sort of naturally. I have had really great people who have helped me throughout my career, who I still rely on. And a lot of it was honestly by happenstance. When I was getting ready to go to Kansas State, I thought I wanted to work in baseball, and I was going to go try to get a job with the baseball program there and see if they would hire me. And the head coach of K-State at that time, I went and met with him. I set up a meeting and I went and met with him, and I had an entire deck that I had put together on things I thought I could do to help his marketing department. And at the end of the meeting, he said, "Great, I'll see you, in a week when you get moved up here, and we can't wait to have you on board." His version of that, and so I called my folks and I was just so excited, right? Because I got this job and I couldn't believe how amazing it was and the process and everything. His version of that, which he told years later, was that there was no job, there was no marketing department. He just had somebody show up in his office building one for him, and he said yes. And so but I think that just illustrates, I started that process, I was so excited, and I could not believe I got this job, and it wasn't even a real job, but I poured everything into it. And that coach is still a very dear friend of mine, and somebody that I call often when I have just general questions on, how did you handle this? Because he faced a lot of adversity. And that program at that time did not have much in funding, it didn't have much in support. And, like there were times when I would have to, if he needed to use the restroom during a game, I would have to run out and hold the line at the porta potty for him. It just was not what you see of these major college programs today. And so I think, that helps me. He reminds me of that when we talk, right? You start somewhere, and that is definitely holding the line at the porta potty for the head coach is definitely a place to start. And so, I think that he helps to remind me that that's something that together we built off of, and we built a really great following there, and the people started coming out to the games, and it was fun and exciting and stuff. So that was not an intentional plan to make him a mentor, in my life, but he has been a mentor and somebody that I talk to very frequently.
Wow, I love that because it kind of goes back into winning with no applause, doing the things that may seem insignificant or doing the grunt work, and you don't know if anyone else is watching, you don't know if it's going to pay off, but you do it anyway and continue to show up. And I think that's just so important. We've had a good conversation tonight. It's been very enjoyable. I think the last thing that I'd ask, and I'll start with Kelsey here, is say at the end of your career you had to write a letter to your younger self, and you had to tell them about what it means to have a meaningful life. But really, less so than that, what are if you could pick 3 traits of an individual who's had a meaningful life, what would you tell your younger self those 3 traits would be?
Oh, that is such a good question. If I had to pick 3 traits of a meaningful life, I would say empathy, just because I feel like there's a lot of meaning in connecting with other people. I would say resilience, just because how we bounce back from the hardships in our life and the attitude we choose to have through them and who we become from them. Like resilience is such an important quality for finding that meaning in the hard things that we deal with. As a third one, I guess I would just say I think faithfulness. Faithfulness is just something that makes my life very meaningful. And so just having that faith is is very meaningful to me, and I'm glad that I've had that throughout my life, and I would write that to my younger self to continue to just have empathy, resilience, and faithfulness.
All right, Angie, do you have 3 traits for us for a person who lives a meaningful life?
I mean, I think for me, being a good teammate is a big piece of that. And being a good teammate is being of value to your teammates at work, your teammates that you may play with, your teammates at home, your family. So I think that is incredibly important, and Jim touched on, but balancing that and making sure that you're always managing your home life in conjunction with the work that you're going to put in your life is super important. And then I think as far as just overall meaning, you need to figure out your purpose and your why and what really drives you. Once you have that in mind, whether it's how you want to be viewed, if you want to be viewed as a hard worker and you want to be viewed as somebody that contributes every day, whatever it might be, once you know what that is, I think then you can start to develop your path forward. So I guess those are the things that I would probably identify the most.
That's great. Jim?
Yeah, it's interesting. Empathy is one of the ones that I wrote down, and Kelsey obviously mentioned that one as well. Kindness is another one. Be kind to people. But a big one for me is having a drive. Angie mentioned that a little bit. And that's just having a drive in your work life for sure, but also in your home life, also in your faith, and just the way that you go about doing things. I'm not a big fan of laziness. There are times where, you need to sit down and watch a baseball game tonight on the couch, like I'm gonna after we hang up. But, just having that drive to know where you're headed and what you're trying to accomplish. And of course, Angie talks about one of the things that we say at the Rangers. Our baseball team talks about dominating the fundamentals, being a good teammate, and competing with passion. If you want to play for the Texas Rangers, those are the 3 things you have to do. We use that on the business side as well, specifically to be a good teammate one. And we do have a lot of people that work for us as well that played college sports, and this is how they get their competitive juices out too. And so, competing with passion, just whether it's amongst ourselves or whether it's anywhere else, those are things that we do. But for me, kindness, empathy, and having a drive are the ones that I would tell my younger self.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're at time here, so just want to thank you again. Thank you all again for taking the time and allowing me to actually not exit the office, but take a break away and go into a breakout room. I'm gonna go back and finish up this pitch deck, but really appreciate the time and the conversation tonight. It was helpful for me, and I know it's going to be helpful for all the members of the Ethos community as well. So hope to stay in touch. Hope this isn't the last time I get to hear all of your voices tonight and see your faces. So would love to catch up following this as well. So just have a good night and keep plugging away.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job,
This is
Joseph,
great.
man. Good job, buddy.
Excellent job, Joseph. Excellent job.